Polaroid in that sense has that edge of surprise where sometimes you might very well like be spot on with everything. Something happens where the result isn't what you would have thought it would have been, but if you just are persistent and be trying that result and getting something else, like I feel like that in and of itself is like a learning experience, you know, because it really forces you to just keep getting at it until like you get, you know, something that is like, wow, like I can't believe that came out of that camera. I literally don't meet her. Um, so the thing of it is because the cameras have such small apertures like f8, f11, and the film is, you know, the most sensitive film is only like 640 ASA before you get to like some level of exposure where you think you're going to overexpose. Instead, you're actually not going to overexpose. The reciprocity failure is going to kick in. So you're almost guaranteed that if you just leave that shutter open as long as you think, like, you know, you might get some stars or you might get no stars, you know, depends on so many factors, but you don't need to put too much thought into metering because you're almost guaranteed to not overexpose.
So you kind of found your minimum time by
Yeah,
trial and error.
pretty much. Like you actually, it's funny because you know you pretty much need a minimum time to get something. Again, it's not going to overexpose so long as you're shooting in an area with less light pollution. If you're shooting with light pollution, it's a different story. So, you know, you might need to take into consideration metering there. But if you're in a dark sky where you can visibly see like thousands of stars, you're not going to overexpose. I don't even think I've tried to shoot at something with such a small aperture because I'm almost afraid that nothing is going to show up on the images. I bet that's really difficult. But you
That's
know what? Like, you know, I almost wonder if maybe you shoot where there's a little bit more light pollution and get some more like glow from the sky to brighten it up a little bit. Maybe you'll get something in that regard. And I think maybe that you could do something cool with that. You know, that could be cool to experiment with.
I went somewhere without any light pollution, and like you said before, with
Mhm.
Polaroid being Polaroid, I got
Yeah,
nothing.
nothing.
I went to the
Yeah, I
middle of
agree.
nowhere, no light pollution, new moon, ideal as possible.
Ideal for digital. Yeah.
Before I mentioned what I thought to be ideal conditions, and you said that that wasn't ideal,
Hmm.
could you, or you said it was ideal for digital? Could you elaborate on
Hmm.
that a bit?
Yeah, okay. So we both know that digital cameras have a lot more power when it comes to low light stuff. Film has much more limitations between the reciprocity failure, um, the type of grain that, you know, is just kind of embedded into the emulsion. The grain is constant. You can't, or not you can't, but it's a lot harder to stack your film images. You'd have to basically scan each one as a 16-bit TIFF and then stack them, which is, you know, it's just a whole other process. Whereas digital, you could kind of batch them all and fire them up into a stacking software. Um, so film as it is much more limiting in regards to doing astrophotography in a dark sky because it takes a lot more effort to get light to hit that film and acquire enough photons to get a good enough exposure. Couple that with the fact that most film, color film at least, is 800 to 1600. I know Delta 3200, but that's black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas digital cameras, you know, you got cameras that can do 12,800, 25,600 ISO and still produce a file that looks pretty clean. And you know, then there's software complications like built-in long exposure noise reduction, things of that nature. So digital has the advantage when it comes to very, very dark skies because the low light edge that digital provides is just something that can't necessarily be replicated then on film. However, film on the flip side does have some pretty cool advantages over digital. The first one is film is actually more sensitive to hydrogen alpha emission, which is that red light emission that comes from nebulae like Orion or nebulae in the Milky Way like the Cat's Paw,
Hmm.
Eagle, Lagoon, Trifid. Those magenta toned nebulae, film can actually pick those up much better than digital because there's no filters in front of the film, whereas digital sensors have UV-IR cut filters and transmission filters that prevent that type of light from reaching the sensor, because in daytime photography that would greatly affect the images. Um, but otherwise, too, film can also be push processed. So you can kind of push process your film in the same way that you could quote unquote increase the ISO or
Hmm.
exposure in digital stuff. So you could actually take your film and push it so you're shooting, instead of say a 1600 roll, a 3200 or even a 6400 roll, and go from there. I also find too that film has a lot more tolerance when it comes to tracking. You can have a tracking error in digital that might be, something like your polar alignment is so very little far off, but you'll see it immediately in digital because there's so many pixels compacted into the sensor that it takes a lot less effort for one star to pass from one pixel to the other. Well, you'll start to see the trailing. Film, there's no pixels. It's just, the silver nitrate, the emulsion. So that kind of margin of error isn't really a thing with film. And it's a lot more forgiving when it comes to tracking and trailing. And I don't know if maybe you've heard of the rule of 500, where you divide your focal length by 500, and that gives you an exposure length that is supposed to be quote unquote before the stars start to trail. Well, with digital, that doesn't really apply anymore. That's just kind of a rudimentary guideline to get you to an approximate number where you need to be.
Hmm.
But the reason why that exists is because it came from film, which was a lot more forgiving to let you get to that exposure setting before the stars started to trail. So when it comes to tracking, you can get a lot longer exposures with film and Polaroid before the stars start to trail, because there's so much more forgiveness to the film. Whereas with digital, you're talking about maybe half to a quarter to a 16th of what you could normally get with the film.
Hmm.
So there's pros and cons to both for sure. This shot here, um, the Milky Way
That's
is,
incredible.
thank you. The Milky Way is visible, but the foreground's a little bit blurred because of the tracker. But a 10-minute shot like this, which normally on digital, even the Milky Way would be blurred due to the fact that the star tracker that I use is not like, crazy precise. It's just a portable
Hmm.
star tracker. But with Polaroid, because, it's much less precise than digital, and it's got that reciprocity thing to it, so it takes a while to generate the exposure. I find that this little Ioptron Skyguider Pro, which I've had for many years, does a pretty decent job, despite being what is considered in astrophotography terms pretty basic. Because, yeah, it looks sophisticated, but generally speaking, to other astrophotography stuff, like this is, you know, pretty standard, pretty simple. It does do the job for Polaroid. And it's really cool because it's super portable. Broken down, I could pretty much take off the base. I could take off the place where the ball head is mounted. And this is actually the tracker itself. This is
Hmm.
it. It's just sits in my hand like this. The battery's built in, the polar scope's built in, and everything from here is pretty much straightforward. And it's super cool because I can take stuff like this up a hike and
Hmm.
break it down into these separate components and put it into my backpack all secured. Same with the camera. And then because the battery's built in, I don't have to worry about things that you would normally have to worry about with a full mount, like external power, and things like counterweights and a big tripod. I can use my compact Gitzo carbon fiber thing here. It'll support this just fine. But yeah, this is definitely something that kind of takes it to the next level. I say once you track, you never go back, because really, like, this thing for Polaroid lets you get those Milky Way shots instead of just doing star trails.
Mm-hmm.
And for other things like using your analog camera with, say, like an 800 film or 1600 and push your stops, and digital too, it lets you shoot things like deep space objects, and it lets you shoot super long exposures of the Milky Way to drop your ISO so you get a nice clean image. So this is like one of the best things ever to invest in astrophotography. You know, it's so cool. And because I have the 680 with the tripod bracket on it, it's even more precise because it really does keep it on the tracker with the ball head. And it's just such a cool tool to use. And I never would have expected to start using it with the Polaroid stuff. It just kind of like fell together, if you will. And so, yeah, like $350 for something as like vital of a tool as this, I think is a no-brainer. It really does take the shots to the next level, and it lets you it opens up the door to so many possibilities of shots beyond just star trails. Is stuff like this, where like I got the clouds with the Milky Way coming across. Here we go. This is a cool one. This is actually the Row Fiji.
I tell you what.
I'm sorry.
Right
Look at
here.
that.
I was about to tell you, that's my favorite one that I saw.
Really? This one's your favorite?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'm so glad you like this one. And I'm totally butchering the pronunciation of Row. Ficus, like something like that. My girlfriend knows how to say it. I don't. And there was like it was a hazy night where I took this, but like I was able to get just enough precision on the tracking where this was exposed, and somehow I got lucky with the colors. Normally I'm getting these warmer shots like this, like these are all warm. Somehow on that very night, I think the film was very cold and I got just that blue tone. Other suggestions I would try if you're feeling like balling out a little bit is getting the tracker, and doing some stuff with that. But if this is something that like you really think like you want to pursue the Milky Way stuff, I think this is the no-brainer.
I've got the Spectra MB.
Yeah, that's the one that I had. Yeah.
And I quite like the look of it. I think it's just a beautiful camera.
It's cool. It's so cool.
I love this one, you know, because it's nice and easy, and there's
Bluetooth
and
for sure.
all of those things, and there's an actual bulb mode. But this one, now that I've talking to you a bit more, I'm thinking I should probably try this one.
Try that one.
Just
I don't
to
know
see what the aperture is, depending on what it is.
I think it's f8.
F10, here we are.
Okay, well that's better than f32.
Yeah, or F16.
That's for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think Spectra film is the same sensitivity as the 680 film, which is awesome. And I think that the optics of that camera will be
superior to the one-step ones for sure.
Exactly.
I hope.
Yeah, I've always loved the Spectras. They're awesome.
So I'm at a stage after talking to you and thinking about this more, where I'm thinking I have to buy a roll for my Spectra system.
You gotta do it
to try it. And then look, the Spectra's got a thread mount,
a tripod rack, a 1/4-inch thread. Yeah,
which is great. What advice would you have to me? I know you suggested shoot with light pollution due to my incredibly small aperture.
So yeah, let's try a couple things. Okay, I think the first thing is try the Spectra. You're going to get a little bit more light with that, and I think the optics are superior as far as sharpness and overall image quality goes beyond just the f10 aperture. Here's the thing. These are my successful photos. Okay, we got maybe 30 or so. Check this out. These, okay, most of these are unsuccessful attempts. These are all failures here. This is all failures. These are all failures. So as far as a hit rate goes,
I'm
if you
on
want to
track.
break it down, I'm sorry?
I'm on track then, as far as the hit rate goes.
We're on the same page. I get maybe, especially at the beginning, I got maybe one successful photo per pack, if that.
Yeah, no,
You
that
know,
that box is a couple $100 worth of
of a film.
cartridges.
It's insane. So it's like, what you see on the surface is only because I've gone through what's in the box. You know what I mean? So that's like, if you ever think that, it gets discouraging or like it's frustrating.
Oh, I definitely do. Late at
Oh yeah.
early in the morning, you get to see the
Yeah.
result. You give it, that good a little amount of time that they need now,
Yeah.
and then you look at it and you go, "Oh, I guess I'm going to
Uh,
bed."
yeah. It's just like, if you want to go to a dark sky to get some more stars, I actually think shooting with the moon might help too.
Mhm.
Not a full moon, but maybe like a 50 to 75% moon where you'll get some glow in the sky.
And
I
where
think
should I
that'll
have
light up.
the moon relative to me? Like,
I
should I
think
be
you should
shooting
have the moon
opposite?
opposite or 90 degrees.
Uh-huh.
Also, try doing some color, believe it or not, when you have that moon out, because I think that the moon will light the sky up blue,
Hmm.
and the luminosity of that blue might show up a little bit better on the color film than the black and white, even though the black and white chemistry is a little bit more sensitive.
Hmm.
Um, Other things you can try too is varying your temperature. And what I mean by that is I've had some luck with this is shoot when the film is warm,
Hmm.
develop when the film is warm, but then of course store the film when it's cold.
Hmm.
I think the film has less reciprocity failure when it's warm versus when it's cold, which I know sounds counterintuitive, but when you think about it, if you're storing the film cold, you're preserving the chemistry.
Hmm.
When you warm up the film, you want to activate that chemistry. So if your film is a little bit warmer when you're shooting, then you might actually have the film absorb more light versus
Hmm.
when it's cold. And a cool thing that I've done in the past that I think you should try is get those cheap uh, hand warmers you can get at a grocery store that are disposable and mount them to almost like the bottom of your film door on your camera and kind of let it warm up. I almost want to say, like, get that joint up to 80, like bring it up to, I'm not saying specifically 80 degrees Fahrenheit, but like get it warm. Give that a try.
Hmm.
Experiment with that. If that doesn't work, well, all right, we'll go back to, keeping it a little bit cooler.
Hmm.
But I think it's worth a shot. And I also think that because I've shot so many of these when it's been warm outside, the warmer the film is, the warmer color temperature you get.
Hmm.
Because I feel like the way just the film is being activated, it just yields warmness. This was one of my warmest nights out shooting, and this is Star Trails, and that is pretty orange. Write down for each shot how long you were exposing for on like your phone or something, like
Hmm.
shot 1, 2 minutes, shot 2, 4 minutes, shot 3, 8 minutes. Write that down and also take a screenshot of the temperature on like the weather app on your phone or something.
Hmm.
And that way you're kind of adding a little bit of science into this. I took 8 minutes at 23 degrees Celsius and it came out like this. So then kind of like pick and choose and formulate something that goes from there. And that's kind of what I've learned to do from all these failed attempts here, to get me to these results. So that way, when you're going forward, you have almost like an educated guess on what you can do to have figure on getting a result out of each shot,
Hmm.
more of a chance of getting a result rather out of each shot. And it looks like almost I'm looking at all my shots, and something that I see myself doing a lot is trees.
Hmm.
Um, I like kind of, this is just me personally, but There's a tree in this shot on the upper corner,
Wow.
kind of like
How long was this exposure?
that looks closer to like 2 hours or so, something like that. I was on a warm night. This kind of the same thing. Here's a tree. And I think what I like about the trees, this looks a lot shorter, maybe like 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
What I like about them is there's an element of the foreground sticking up into where the stars are, and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
like juxtaposes um, what we're seeing here as far as like the stars versus the landscape. And there are shots that I've done that don't have the trees, like this shot here, but it just looks like blurred. I
Mm-hmm.
see a clear foreground, and it's really tough to tell that there's star trails up there. Finding that kind of space where like you want to incorporate foreground elements in showing like the motion of time. Think about the rotation of the Earth. And here's what I mean by this. You're in the southern hemisphere. So think about it like this. The further you look south, the greater the dramatic kind of curvature of the trails are going to be. And that's because we are rotating around our poles, right? So you look south, you're going to see the stars rotate around the southern celestial pole. The further out you look towards east, west, north, the less trails you're going to see. When you look towards north, you're actually going to see the trails curve the opposite direction because you're looking the opposite pole. So if you want to show more movement in your shots, if you want to show more of a dramatic effect, get closer to the poles. So use the elements of your foreground to be like, oh, well, this tree faces west, but this mountain faces due south. I'm going to get that mountain because the mountain, it's going to have the mountain here, and then it's going to have the swirly trails like here, and it's really going to show more motion than this tree facing the east-west. It's just really going to be lines. Here is the shot looking at the pole here. And then here's the shot looks like due west or something here. Notice how much less movement is in this shot versus this shot, despite the exposures. This is probably more like an hour, and this is maybe another half an hour more, and that's how much different the movement is. This is way more dramatic, and you know that's just because I simply pointed the camera to get the North Star in the shot. So every star going outwards is showing more and more and more and more movement.
Thank you for this all. I don't know if I have
Yeah,
any
of
more
course.
questions, but it's reminded me that there's a lot more that I should probably be considering. the reality
I thought
that
it was helpful.
the reality that astrophotography is complicated, and shooting Polaroid, as I am aware already, is complicated. But
Even more
once you
complicated.
add
Yeah,
complicated with complicated,
it's
it's
mega.
it's a world of complication, and then you factor
It,
in the weather and all those things.
it's so difficult, but you know what? I think that makes the reward ever so much sweeter because when you get a shot that comes out, it doesn't matter if you've shot 10 cartridges and you got one shot that came out, and you look at that one shot, it's like, oh my goodness, between the weather, between the temperatures, between the haze, between clouds, between light pollution and the moon cycle, and being having a busy schedule and actually having the time to get out, and you got that one shot, it's like, wow. Digital makes it seem easy, but this is far more rewarding.
Thank you very much, and we
No
will talk
problem.
through
We'll stay in
Instagram.
touch. All right.
Thank you very much.
Sweet. Thanks, everybody. Take
You
care.
too. Wow.